When we talk about public procurement, it is one of the critical areas, particularly when we look at the government of the day. And why do we need to understand the operations in government? Because remember, the government is one of the biggest spenders in any economy. And as being one of the biggest spenders, it is very important for us to be in a position to understand what happens in government. So public procurement in simple terms is how the government acquires goods, works, or services to be able to achieve certain objectives within the organization. So at the end of this unit, you will be able to understand different aspects of public procurement in Kenya and public procurement at large. So our first topic will be procurement. What needs to come into our mind is the activities of government. And every day you'll find that the government, through different state corporations or different ministries or departments of government, procure or acquire goods to be able to achieve certain objectives within the organization. Recently, we saw the government trying to construct affordable housing. And when you look at affordable housing, you realize that the government has entered into PPP agreements with different private sectors with the focus of building more houses in urban areas. And if that is the case, then it means that the government, through public procurement, have been able to achieve the objective of constructing these houses. Because when you're constructing these houses, you need to acquire goods, you need to acquire services, and you need to acquire works that will assist you to be able to achieve what you want to achieve at the end of the day. So at the end of this unit, or at the end of this topic or semester, you will be able to look at the following. The first topic will be introduction to public procurement. Here we shall look at what is procurement, the importance of procurement, and we shall also look at evolution of procurement so that you understand the various stages that procurement has undergone. Then we will look at public procurement reforms. When we talk about reforms, we are talking about changes that have happened over the past 50 years in terms of public procurement. So that when you look at the Act, the Public Procurement Asset and Disposal Act, you will understand and appreciate the fact that there has been a lot of reforms that have shaped the public procurement process in government. Then we shall look at the guiding principles in public procurement. When we talk about principles, these are guidelines, or they can be philosophies that you have to follow for you to perform better in the government. Then we shall look at social economic development. Basically, we are trying to understand what happens in a particular setting. For example, when you are working, you need to look at both aspects in terms of the social aspect and the economical aspect and how it is going to affect the organization. Then we shall look at sustainable public procurement. And when we talk about sustainable procurement, we are talking about procurement that is going to add value, not only to the institution itself, but we are also looking at the public at large. And sustainability is all about the future generation. So that the activities that we are doing today will be activities that will impact the future generation. And they will be talking about the going concern concept that allows you to look at the future and how the future is going to be affected. Chapter 2 is on legislative and regulatory framework. And in this chapter, we will focus more on the legal aspect of public procurement. And you can also look at the regulatory framework. This allows you to be able to understand procurement in different contexts. And that is why we shall focus more on the Public Procurement Asset and Disposal Act of 2015, together with the regulation of 2020. We shall also look at the Constitution briefly, and maybe some other critical legal frameworks that can be applicable in public procurement. Chapter 3, we shall look at public procurement bodies. And these bodies are bodies that have been given the mandate to ensure that they monitor what government institutions are doing, so that they put what is called checks and balances. In the event you don't implement public procurement, then you will be liable and you must be accountable. We shall look at different institutions like the National Treasury, the Public Procurement Regulatory Authority, the Public Procurement Administrative Review Board, the Kenya Institute of Supply Management, and the Kenya Institute of Supply Examination Board, and briefly look at the county governments and the procurement functions in counties. Chapter 4 is on general procurement principles and rules. Our focus here will be to understand the various rules that guide procurement practitioners when they are performing their procurement activities within the public sectors. So we shall look at different principles, different rules and regulations that will shape how we are supposed to carry out activities within the public sector. Chapter 5 is on organization of procurement in public sector. And the focus here is to be able to understand the organization of public sector. When we look at public sector, you realize that we have different functions within the public sector. So in brief, basically, we are going to look at different functions and how they support public procurement in Kenya. A good example, we shall look at the function of an accounting officer. And in simple terms, when you talk about accounting officer, we are talking about the CEO or the head of a public entity or the head of a procuring entity. A public entity is an entity that is fully supported or managed by the government. A good example is Ministry of Public Works. So that is a public entity. Another example is Kenya Revenue Authority. Kenya Revenue Authority, that is a public entity. And it can also be a procuring entity by virtue of procuring goods, works, or services. We shall look at others like consortium buying. We shall look at procuring agents. We shall look at different committees in government and what is their key responsibility, and many more. Chapter 6 is procurement methods for goods, services, and works. Our focus here will be to understand the different methods that are used in procuring of goods, services, and works. Therefore, it means that at the end of the day, we shall understand different methods. Remember, we have two methods of procurement. That is the preferred procurement method, and the other ones are called alternative procurement methods, which comprises of different methods like direct procurement, restricted tendering, two-stage tendering, reverse auction, and many more. Reverse auction, and many more. Chapter 7 is on procurement of consultancy services. And our focus here will be to understand what happens in consultancy. We need to be very categorical and understand what happens. Public procurement and contracts. So we will also look at how to prepare contracts and things like that. And this will also help us to understand how to publish contracts, performance security, advance payments, and contract administration. Chapter 9 is on preference and reservation schemes. And remember, we shall look at different preservation schemes that the government has set and what are the procedures for you to qualify to be in that category. Chapter 10 is inventory control and asset management and distribution. Then chapter 11 is on an administrative and review board. And lastly, chapter 12 is on ethics in public procurement, together with accountability and responsibility of public procurement and other authorities in public procurement. Chapter 14, obviously, we will be looking at the emerging issues and trends in public procurement. So having talked about that, maybe if there's a question before we start or a concern, so I give you a few minutes so that you can ask a question. We can start with Tabitha. Tabitha, a question?
Niko sawa mwalimu.
Okay, Juma.
Now, my concern was
Yes.
how different in terms of what we are covering and in content from the unit in procurement of goods, works and services in relations to public procurement.
Okay.
The earlier unit that Tuesday and this one.
So the other one is general. Public
In terms of
procurement
content,
is specific to the government.
specific to the government. Huh?
Yes.
Okay.
But your is not clear. I don't know what we are going to do because I can't get you. Make sure next time you get some,
Let me my earphones. Huh?
or you can put your earphones so that we can be able to communicate. Michael?
Yes.
Yeah, any question?
Not at the moment.
Okay, so let's jump into understanding public procurement. So when we talk about procurement, there are many things that come into our mind. And basically, procurement, in simple terms, you can say it is the acquisition of goods, works, and services using different contractual means. And the main focus of bringing these goods, works, and services on board is to be able to meet certain needs within the organization, or to be able to meet identified needs in a particular organization. So public procurement or procurement in general will assist different organizations to be able to bring different products, different services, so that once they bring those services into your organization, then you will be able to meet your identified need. On the other hand, when we talk about public procurement, what comes into our mind is the word public. And public in general, we are looking at what the government does in terms of acquiring goods, works, and services. For example, when we talk about the government, we are looking at the government. When we talk about the government, there are three things that come into our mind. Government. So number one, we are talking about the ministries. So for example, or an example of a ministry is the Ministry of Education. So that is an example of a ministry. Then we can talk about state departments. State departments. So for example, we can look at the State Department of Defense, we can look at the State Department of Immigration, the State Department of, there are many state departments. Then lastly, we are looking at the agencies of government or authorities of government, agencies of government. A good example is something like the Kenya Revenue Authority. You have the KEMSA. You have many other agencies of government and authorities. So basically, they are all supported by the government, fully funded by the government. Therefore, we talk about public procurement. So you need to understand that we have ministries there, we have state departments, we have agencies, and many other institutions, even corporations form part of the government. So the process of public procurement spans the whole life from the identification of need through the end of service. Yes?
What about county government?
Yeah, it's part of, remember after the new constitution, remember we have national government, and we have county government. All those form part of the government, and that is why I talked about governments. You see, I've written government here. So we have the national government and we have the county government. Even in the counties, they have ministries. And some of these ministries normally are managed by the national government. For example, when you go to, we are in which county? Yuma.
Where do I come from? I'm in Nairobi County, but I come from Kwale.
Where are you staying right now?
Nairobi County.
So Nairobi County has different ministries within the county itself. That is why you remember this person called Mosiria. You know Mosiria? The Minister of Environment in Nairobi County. Yes. Hope I've answered your question.
Okay, my other question is,
Yes.
so they use the same criteria of procurement?
You're saying?
Or do they use a general method of procurement, or to a point they get specific, they become specific?
By general, what do you mean? Because there's no method called general.
I mean, for example, when I'm advertising for a tender,
they are guided by the act.
guided by
In the counties or in the national government, what guides you is the act. And that is why we are talking about the reforms. Remember, after the new constitution in 2010, the new constitution led to the development of the county governments, the 47 county governments. And in 2015, they amended the Act of 2005 to include the reforms. So we shall look at the reforms when we reach there, so that you'll be able to understand more about what we at.
Thank you, Malima.
Okay, welcome. Aiko, you have a question?
No.
Okay. So in the context of the procurement process, one of the things that we normally look at when we are acquiring goods, works, and services is what is called the value for money. So that when you are buying or you are bringing suppliers on board, you must ensure that you get value for your money. And the value basically means that when you're buying something, you need to look at the principle of economy so that you don't economy so that you don't overprice or underprice your bids. So it's very, very important. And the other thing about the public procurement process or the procurement process in general, to be able to optimize. When you look at the whole life cost of what you are going to buy, you need at least to get value for your money. And also when you're buying, you need to ensure that what you are bringing into the organization is going to lead to customer requirements or to meet. So allow me to look at the objectives of public procurement. And when we talk about the objectives of public procurement, we are looking at the objectives in terms of what public procurement needs to achieve. One of the objectives of public procurement is to maximize efficiency. By maximization of efficiency, what comes into our mind is that we need to understand the processes that we are going to engage ourselves in. And these processes must be seamless so that in any given time, operations are more effective and they are going to bring an impact into what the organization is doing. The second objective is to promote fair competition. And that is why when you look at the government keenly, you realize that they always advocate for open tendering or competitive bidding. Why competitive bidding? Because by competitive bidding, it means that each and every interested party who wants to participate in this particular bid is going to be given an opportunity and therefore lead to what is called fair competition. However, that process is very long, but it is worth it because of the focus of government. Then the other objective that is critical is to promote integrity. Integrity in simple terms is doing the right thing, regardless of who is watching you. So by integrity, the procurement process, the procurement in public entities has been geared towards ensuring that they implement integrity. And that is why when you look at chapter 6 of the Constitution, one of the key pillars of chapter 6 is integrity. So another objective is to increase transparency and accountability and to promote local industry. So when you look at transparency, this means that the information that you're going to give should be an information that is clear and every member is able to understand so that you share all the information. Don't act discriminatory where you just try to give some few people information because of the interest that you have. Accountability is all about some people must be answerable. So that if you're given an opportunity to do a particular task, at the end of the day, in the event something happens, then you need to answer. Not necessarily that something bad is going to happen. Even if it is something good, you need to tell us what really transpired. Then we are talking about promotion of local industry. That is the focus of government. And that is why every time you hear the government is saying that build Kenya, buy Kenya. So that when you build Kenya, buy Kenya, you will be focusing on promoting the local industry. And one of the requirements, according to the Public Procurement Act, for example, if you are in county government of Nairobi and you have floated a bid, the first priority you need to give are the people who are living within the Nairobi region so that you develop the local contractors. You are not supposed to go and start looking for other contractors from maybe another county, yet you have internal capacity within the Nairobi region or Nairobi County. So another objective that is critical is to optimize cost by lowering transaction cost and overheads. So our focus as the government or our focus as the public entity is to be able to lower the cost. And the only way to lower the cost is by doing the due diligence and ensuring that when you enter into contracts with different service providers or contractors or even suppliers, you are going to negotiate the best value, and this will lead to cost savings, both in the short run and in the long run. Then another objective is to create value through process, product development, and quality improvement. So you must be able to create value. And that is why the government has really focused on the value addition. Look at the county government of Makueni. They came up with a project of converting the mangoes during the season when mangoes are in plenty, so that they can develop a product that is going to add value to the farmers in that area. So they came up with the project of processing the mangoes and packaging that mango so that at the end of the day, it can have a longer shelf life. Another focus that they are trying to say, and I heard them talk about it the other time, is that the government wants to start repackaging their tea, so that once they repackage the tea, they'll be able to sell the repackaged tea at a high price compared to what they are currently doing, transporting the raw materials abroad, and they come when they are too expensive. So that is one of the focus that government is doing in order to be able to increase the process and develop quality products. Then another objective is to utilize assets by outsourcing inventory. So remember, when you talk about outsourcing, find that the government through these different
Mwalimu, you are unaudible. Huh?
yes, yes. So the other objective that I wanted to touch on was the utilization of assets by outsourcing and inventory management. Sometimes the government is in the business of outsourcing different activities to third parties. And the main focus is to be able to manage those assets so that they will take a long time in terms of maintaining those assets. And we're also talking about inventory management. Remember, most of the time we talk about goods, works, and services. So you need to manage your inventory in a way that you optimize your performance as an organization. Therefore, the government is in the business of ensuring that they are able to optimize their inventory. And that is why they have systems in place, like the e-procurement systems that have the inventory management module that assists in managing of inventory in the store. Another objective that I talked about was the objective of promoting local industries and economic development. I talked about local industries where the government is in the business of ensuring that they market Kenya as a brand. They also market products that Kenyans produce in other parts of the world. So by so doing, they will be able to lead to what is called economic development. A good example is avocados. They are normally exported to other parts of the world. Through that exportation, the government is able to lead to what is called economic development. And this has a ripple effect to the farmers and other people who are in the supply chain management. The other thing that I'm going to look at is the evolution of public procurement, but I don't want to dwell so much on the evolution, because that one is for purposes of understanding the development of procurement. So when you look at the procurement in Kenya and the evolution, it can be traced in as early as 1947. And this was a time when Kenya was still under the British colony. And it was a time where we had the Second World War. And most of the time, what used to happen during that time is that the government, together with crown agents, were the ones who were responsible for procuring. So that the crown agents, their main focus was to be able to procure on behalf of the British colony. So they used to procure goods, then they export those goods to other parts of Europe and even other parts of the world. So that period was referred to as the colonial period, and it was between 1947 and 1962. But you might find other books are talking about 1953 to 1963. So it depends with which book you are reading. Then the second stage was the post-colonial period, and this was the period after Kenya got its independence. And in 1963, remember, that was the time we got our independence. And the Ministry of Works was the ministry that was responsible for ensuring that they did all the works on behalf of the government. So their main focus was to be able to perform different functions, and it was headed by a chief procurement officer and a chief storekeeper. Then this led to the development of the supply manual, and the focus of the supply manual basically was to break down the different activities that the ministry was doing together with the National Treasury during that time. So I won't dwell so much on that. So the other stage, or the other stage was the stage that was called the World Bank period of 1990 to 2000. So during this time, the World Bank decided to do a survey to establish some of the challenges that were facing public procurement in Kenya. So they came up with different observations that led to different reforms that we are seeing up to today. And the main focus of the World Bank was to be able to understand the gap that existed that led to maybe the public procurement not being effective or efficient in their operation. Then some of the things that they observed during that time that led to some of these reforms, the first one was the issue of lack of accountability. People were not accountable. Contracts were done, then people really did not show some level of accountability. These affected many operations within government, and that was one of the deficiencies of the public procurement then. Then the other thing was vague procurement procedures and policies. So the policies were not that clear, and it took a lot of effort for the government to be able to streamline these systems. However, as much as they would want to streamline these systems, it led to a lot of abuse and manipulations so that the public officers, they could collaborate and try to manipulate the system to their advantage. Then the issue of corruption, which is a very common phenomenon, was also on the increase. And this led to different Then we also had lack of structures. There was no structure that was clear. This therefore led to a lot of anomalies when it came to issues of reporting, and politicians really influenced the process. Another one was lack of transparency. lack of transparency. So we had a lot of issues in terms of transparency. Poor planning was also another reason, and lack of checks and balances. So this led to a lot of reforms that were recommended by the World Bank. So the other things that were identified were management of funds. We had issues with management of funds, the inability of government to provide services effectively and efficiently, and we also had issues to do with lack of fair competition that led to many reforms. So the phase 4 is about procurement reforms period, and this was the period between 2001 to 2009. And in this period, they introduced what is called the exchequer. And the work of exchequer was basically to allocate different finances to different government institutions so that at the end of the day, they were able to approve the exchequer and also implement an audit committee that was responsible for auditing the different ministries and government entities. The exchequer was empowered, and it was under the Ministry of Finance, and their main focus was to be able to understand or to audit government institutions and see how they manage their funds. Other reforms were the law of procurement in 2005, which gave birth to the Act in 2005 and the regulation in 2006, 2007. Then it also led to the Public Procurement Practitioners Manual, which gave birth to the Kenya Institute of Supplies Management. So that once they had the Public Practitioners Manual, the focus was to be able to organize procurement in a way that it was more structured and standardized so that people were able to understand the whole process. This also gave birth to what is called the public-private partnership contracting. And the main focus of the PPPs was to be able to involve the private sector in procurement of goods, or basically in doing projects, major projects. And the main focus was that the private sector was going to bring resources and the government was going to provide maybe the land to develop certain facilities in government. So that depending on their level of agreement, they could enter into different PPP agreements and come up with a plan that they were going to move with that plan to ensure successful implementation of public procurement projects. Then phase 5 was the phase that led to the development of the new constitution in 2010. This gave birth to the constitution. And the constitution, remember, led to a game changer in how the government was going to approach different aspects. The constitution also led to the preference and reservation schemes. And that is why when you look at chapter 56 and 55 of the constitution, they normally talk about affirmative action. And the work of affirmative action is to include the women, so the women, the youth, the marginalized, and the people living with disabilities. So they focus more on empowering those people. And that is why 30% of all procurement in government normally goes to this category, people. So 2011, they introduced the preference and reservation schemes. This led to the county government regulation also. And when you look at the Public Procurement Asset and Disposal Act of 2005, it was reviewed, and this led to the inclusion of the preference and reservation schemes. together with other things that improved the Act. And normally the Act undergoes reviews after every 5 years so that maybe they can improve on the Act and the regulation and many more. Any question? So allow me to talk about the principles guiding public procurement. And when we talk about the principles, we are talking about the foundations under which public procurement operates. And these foundations are foundations that practitioners need to understand. Who is a practitioner? A practitioner is an individual who has the experience, an individual who has skills, you have skills, and an individual who has knowledge in matters to do with public or to do with procurement or supply chain management. For by courtesy of finishing your diploma or degree, master's, or even PhD, and having a professional qualification, then by that virtue, you can become a practitioner with the experience that you have and the skills that you have acquired over the years. So one of the principles is the national values and principles of governance. So the national values and principles of governance, these are principles that are well enshrined in the Kenyan Constitution. So that as a citizen of a particular country or as a government employee, then you need to understand what are these values and principles that will guide you when you're doing your day-to-day activities or when you are doing your operations and governance issues. So one of the issues that you need to look at is issues like accountability, transparency, sustainable development. The second one is equality and freedom from discrimination. So you need to act in a manner that does not discriminate. Therefore, you need to act in a manner that is without discrimination, therefore promoting what is called equality. And discrimination can take different forms. You can discriminate in terms of race, you can discriminate in terms of sex, in terms of marital status, health status, origin, color, disability, beliefs, culture, etc. Then another principle is the principle of affirmative action programs. And that is why I talked about chapters 55 and 56 of the Constitution that looks at different categories of people who are vulnerable. Therefore, the government has set 30% of this procurement to this category. And here we are talking about the youths, the minority, the marginalized, and the people living with disability. Another principle is the principle of integrity. We talked about integrity, and basically integrity is doing the right thing. Make sure when you're a procurement practitioner, always do the right thing. Then the principle of public finance. And when we talk about principle of public finance, our focus will be on chapter chapter 12 of the Kenyan Constitution, which talks about public on constitution, so which talks about public finance. So you must understand the burden of taxation and how the government is supposed to raise revenue. They can raise revenue, and that is why we always put some checks and balances. If the government is misusing public funds, we normally must be able to understand how they are using our money to perform their day-to-day activities. Therefore, the president and different leaders must be accountable in terms of how they're supposed to use our money. Then we have the principle of value and principle of public service. So as a public servant, there are some principles that you must look at. And one of the principles is the issue of professional ethics. Remember, when you talk about ethics, you are talking about morals. So that as a public servant, there are some morals that you need to have. And some of these morals will shape your behavior and how you're supposed to approach people in a public office. So professional ethics will call for better ways of using resources and also acting in a manner that you are not impartial in any way, and ensuring that you involve people in policy making. The issues of accountability are also very critical. Then promotion of local industries. We've talked about local industries and how you are supposed to promote the local industries. Then the principle of professionalism and international norms. You also need to understand how you can engage professionals, and you also need to look at the international aspect when it comes to procurement. Maximization of value for money. Here we are looking at value in terms of trying to establish and to always get the most advantageous combination of cost. So value is all about economy, and as much as possible, you will be required to ensure that you don't overspend or underspend. And you also look at issues to do with cost. Then another principle is the principle of information flow. You must ensure that you communicate information to different stakeholders in the quest to perform within the public procurement settings. So stakeholders are very critical. And here we can look at the general public, can look at different suppliers and many more. So what is the role of public procurement in social economic development? When we talk about social economic development, we are looking at how public procurement can influence the growth and the expansion of different aspects within society. So the first role is ensuring best value for money. It is the work of procurement to ensure that they get value at the end of the day. Local capacity and employment. So the government is in the business of ensuring that they employ and create employment to the unemployed youth in society. And that is why when you look at the focus of government, every time they're talking about affordable housing, their main concern is employment. And they're always advocating for creating more jobs. And that is why when you look at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, they're in the business of exporting labor to other parts of the world, which to me might seem not a good practice, but it is happening. So it is the focus of government to ensure that they create employment. Promoting innovation. This is where the government is in the business of coming up with new ideas and how best they can incorporate some of these ideas and motivate suppliers to be innovative and come up with ideas that will transform how we do different activities within the organization. Then we are talking about role modeling in ethical practices. So this is where the government is focusing on coming up with professional bodies or bodies that are able to monitor what the public sector is doing. And an example of the body is the Kenya Institute of Supply Management. And their main focus is to be able to design trainings where people are going to be trained and to be developed so that they can understand what they need to do. Ensuring sustainability, this is where we are looking at how the government can reuse or re-engineer or even recycle and promote environmental protection. And that is why when you look at the issue of NEMA, their main focus is to keep checks and balances to ensure that people comply with different policies that the government has set. So I don't want to dwell on that. Can look at that. Any question? Any question?
So last